Hi, I'm Danny Clode. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm a prosthetic and augmentation designer. So most of my work is multidisciplinary collaboration. So I work with artists, models, engineers, anthropologists, and now neuroscientists to develop work that really kind of explores the future architecture and perception of our bodies. So I'm just going to give you some quick insight. I'm going to run through quite a few projects just to give you some considerations when designing for our future bodies. So I've had a great prosthetic introduction already, but yeah, let's start with prosthetics from a design point of view. Prosthetics fascinate me as physical objects because they sit in this really unique crossover between kind of tool and body part and experience, and they're kind of all of these things and none of them at the same time. And not a lot of objects do that. And I think it's because of how they manage to do this. They can be this amazing blueprint for us to better understand how to design for the body. So through my experience when designing these kind of complex and nuanced objects, I've realized that we need to focus more on these three design values. It's emotional, aesthetic, and physical connection between the wearer and the object, as well as the function and control. And I'm going to use this piece of work I did with the Alternative Limb Project and Kelly Knox to give you some quite extreme examples of what I mean by these design values. So this is Kelly Knox. She's an amazing model and disability rights activist. And from the beginning, this design brief was really interesting, making arms for her, because Kelly is a congenital one-hander, so meaning she was born with one arm, she was born her whole self, and she actually chooses to not wear a prosthetic in her daily life for multiple reasons. So suddenly this object, from a design point of view, that's usually so saturated in this one specific function, became open for alternative kind of perspectives and needs for Kelly as an individual. So this was our first piece together that we designed. It's called Synchronized. And this was to really explore the emotional connection between Kelly and the object. So with this arm, we decided to completely flip the normal order of focus of a prosthetic, which is usually the hand, and show Kelly's actual arm shape, which you can see in the electroplated socket there. And so the socket that usually hides her body and her arm is now celebrating her body shape. And this then slowly transitions into clear layered acrylic pieces that form a one-to-one mirrored recreation of Kelly's right arm, showing this visual connection with the body. And then when she turns it on, as you might have seen in the video, there's a layer in the wrist that ticks in time to her heartbeat. And this also can continue to tick when she's not wearing it, which creates this lasting connection when there's no longer a physical one. So this is our second piece we designed together. It's called Materialize Arm. And this was to really push and challenge the boundaries of the current aesthetics and materiality that we use with prosthetic design. It's divided into two main sections. Part skin-like silicone, yes, that is silicone, that's my collaborator Sophie's work, and part mixed materials. These are also interchangeable. So the arm is made up of over 20 different materials, ranging from hand-finished wood, pumice, cork, 3D printed resins, plastic, plated bronze. And this was Kelly's favorite arm by far, and she said, and I quote, I felt like it was part of me, not separate, which was totally unexpected. And this is really awesome coming from someone who actually chooses to not wear a prosthetic in daily life and has had this really just instant connection with this piece. So as you saw in Tamar's talk, our third piece was the vine arm, which was a kind of a botanical, tentacle, kind of flora-fauna hybrid. We were trying to create this physical reactive extension of Kelly. And with this piece, we wanted to really push the physical boundaries of what a prosthetic is or can be. So it's made up of 26 individual vertebrae that I designed, and it's controlled with 4 pressure sensors embedded in Kelly's shoes, above and below her big toes, to control the different degrees of freedom. So as I mentioned earlier, Kelly is her whole self, as many congenital individuals feel. So are these objects prosthetics, or are they actually augmentation? So to deep dive into augmentation technology, I developed the third thumb, which is a 3D printed thumb extension for your hand controlled with your toes. So I'll play a short video. So this is the thumb. So this is a bit of intro into the control. You can see it's got 2 degrees of freedom, which is across the hand and up towards the fingers, which I'll go into further shortly. It's all 3D printed. It's flexible. It's toe controlled. It's proportional control as well, so as you press down, it's responding very instantly to your body. So it's great for bimanual tasks, so tasks that usually require two hands, you can do single-handedly. And also, this is the first time all these people tried it. I made sure to be recording as soon as it moved. So it's usually a pretty good response that people have. So, is it a prosthetic or is it augmentation? I get asked this question a lot about the third thumb, and I always answer it's both or it's up to the wearer. Anyone can wear the third thumb as long as they have kind of a part of their hand or perhaps their wrist, and as long as they have two toes to control it, but also this, again, can be edited for the wearer. I like this photo because it asks an interesting question. This is the same device on the same person, but the thumb on the right might be considered augmentation, and the thumb on the left might be considered a prosthetic. So the line can be really blurry, which I find really interesting. And it really means that we don't have to silo this technology. We can develop assistive technology and augmentative technology simultaneously. The perception that a prosthetic replaces something missing first implies that that person has lost something, and that you're providing a technical assistive solution. You need to acknowledge that they've suffered a loss and that a prosthetic doesn't necessarily completely resolve that. It just helps them to function in a world that's been designed around 10 fingers and 2 hands. But a prosthetic doesn't necessarily fix someone or replace something that's been lost. It extends their physical ability. But we need to define augmentation a little bit further. So with this diagram, you can see the overlap that tools and augmentation have. Tools, augmentation, and assistive devices have. And for now, I'm going to zoom into the augmentation tools overlap specifically. So a great way to think about controlled functional human augmentation is on this kind of complex spectrum with tools on the other side. Designing tools is inherently human, but what does a tool do? It extends our function, but in order to do that, it takes something away first. Tools extend function by substitution. For example, a digger provides significant earth-moving capabilities, load carrying, a massive extension on our cupped hands, or even our arms when using a shovel. But in order to do this, it takes almost everything away from us. Our concentration, our attention, our hands, our feet, it predefines our body position, but what the trade-off is worth it for what it affords us. I kind of see augmentation as on the other side of the spectrum. Augmentation is a way of extending the body with the least amount of impact as possible. Impact in this case can be defined as, for example, the surface area of the body taken up, like with an exoskeleton suit, covering the body or restricting the movement whilst adding specified strength, or impact to the body for how it's being controlled, like how I use the toes to control the third thumb. But the added difference that I see is that augmentation is more of a layer on the body. You can still use your body, it's just been extended. So for example, you can be wearing the third thumb and still utilize your complete hand, and then also hold a tool or perhaps two. And in the same idea, if we're talking about the spectrum of tool on one side being functional substitution, ranging to augmentation being this kind of completely zero impact body extension, then there are no current full augmentation devices that exist, but we're certainly working on it. So what are the aims and promises of augmentation? So there's medical assistance, so helping people with a range of different physical abilities, either temporarily or long-term, for example, with exoskeletons. Extending dexterity, predominantly the arms and hands are being focused on. Aiding mobility, so of the lower limbs, like preventing muscle fatigue or increasing strength, like with an external leg muscle. Wearable biomimicry, so like tails or wings. Exploring new environments that our bodies can't handle, like making space travel or deep sea exploration easier. Productivity in general is definitely a big focus, especially in the workplace. Again, kind of usually these exoskeleton type devices that are kind of rudimentary extra arms. Also, who knows what's coming next? What's really exciting about this field is it's highly connected to technological growth, new development, new research, and also societal interest. So back to the third thumb. So the third thumb project was my graduate work from my design products masters at the Royal College of Art in London. And it started out of this kind of fascination with prosthetics as objects. I wanted to understand what it was like to control something extra attached to my body, whilst also expanding the motor abilities of the hand. So I was really inspired by the body, and looking closer at the structure of our hands, there's no kind of rigid interlocking parts. There's only material being kind of pushed and pulled very deliberately. So based off this, I started prototyping with a flexible 3D printed filament, trying to recreate this really uniquely human movement of our thumbs. Also traditionally a very challenging part of prosthetic hand design. We really can't recreate the body in bone and muscle and skin and tissue yet. People are definitely working on it, but what we can do is be more inspired by its ultimate function and utilize the materials that we do have. And sometimes the outcome is actually more interesting. When we focus on extension, not replacement, we open up possibilities beyond the human physicality. So I had my extra thumb, now I needed to control it. So the more complex the wearable design, the harder it is to control. Control is very much the bottleneck for this kind of technology. So the third thumb recreates the two main movements of our thumbs, which is flexion, extension, and adduction and abduction. And these are wirelessly controlled by two pressure sensors worn underneath the big toes. So why the toes? When you drive a car, do you think about pushing your foot down and you go forward, or do you think about moving forward and your foot goes down? This is kind of a learned connection that we have driving cars, but it also really helps that when it comes to hands and feet, we have this kind of a lot more coordination than we realize. Tools and products like drums, sewing machines, electric guitars, pianos, cars are already really utilize this strong connection between our hands and feet to extend the task that the hands are doing. So jumping forward a bit, I get asked a lot, how quickly can I use the third thumb? How quickly can I learn to use the third thumb? Which is a really important question when it comes to engaging with this kind of new technology. So to put this to the test, in July last year, myself and the Plasticity Lab and Tamar had the great opportunity to be part of the Royal Society Summer Science Exhibition, which is an exhibition in London, a 5-day flagship public engagement event for the Royal Society. So we tested, oh, they're playing, yeah. So we tested 596 participants over 5 days, and almost everyone who tried on the third thumb could use it. And successfully complete a task. 98% of people who could figure out how to manipulate objects using the thumb within a minute, and this was only after 1 minute of familiarization with the device. We had an incredible age range, as you saw with the previous slide. So here are some of the data plotted against age in particular. So the teeny tiny kids did struggle a little bit. That was more kind of a challenging exhibition part of the element, but they could still do the task with a thumb within a minute. So now we know how people perform at a minute. How about more time? How good can they get with the third thumb? So to test this more long-term use, we trained people to use the third thumb for about 2 hours a day for 5 days, and they also got to take the thumb home with them each day. We also had a control group that wore the thumb for the same amount of time for the same training. The thumb was just not operational. So the training was made up of a combination of 9 different tasks repeated over the 5 days, each task creating a different challenge with the thumb for the participant. So some of the examples are the Jenga task, in which the focus is to use the thumb in collaboration with another finger to pick up multiple blocks and build a tower. The cups task in the middle is about utilizing the thumb to free up the use of the fingers, in this case to remove the marble from a cup with a spoon. And the tapes task was about completely occupying the hand, so the participant only uses the thumb to help to really kind of fine-tune their small motor movements and the awareness of the end of the thumb. As you can see from the week's data, practice makes perfect. So then we also added a dual task. So they were simultaneously, whilst they were building their block tower, they had to do some simple addition and subtraction. And this was to test the cognitive load that the third thumb was having on the participants. But even whilst they were multitasking, their performance was not significantly impaired in both early and late stages of learning, indicating that we could easily multitask while using the thumb. So alongside the training, we also did a coordination task with the participants. This was every day. So the goal was to move the third thumb to meet the tips of the biological fingers, one at a time as instructed. And this is also a great kind of use of doing the 2 degrees of freedom as well, playing around with 2 degrees of freedom. So we measured the number of fingers that people could successfully find within a 1-minute trial for multiple trials across the week. We found that participants were able to basically control the thumb straight away, as you saw with the Royal Society data. But then they get even better at coordinating the thumb with their hand movements in a very short time frame. Participants were also able to do this task blindfolded, relying more on the sensory feedback. Sorry, that was from a previous slide. Creating this version of what we call kind of proprioception of the third thumb, which is kind of the sense that we all have, this awareness of our limbs and body in space. So they could do it blindfolded, which was really amazing. But ultimately, when we make these kinds of changes to the body, we also need to consider the brain. We need to understand how the brain responds to augmentation, especially when we're looking to change the way we physically and biologically collaborate with this kind of augmentation technology in the future. So a big question for us in the Plasticity Lab is how the intensive usage of these augmentation technologies impacts the representation of the biological body in the brain. So we put our third thumb participants in the MRI scanner before and after their 5 days of training. So here are some of the results. I'd like to remind you I'm a designer, but I'm going to work my way through this with you. So we'll be looking at the primary motor cortex across the left and right hand areas. So you can see the orange parts of the brain diagram there. So something to note, during the scan, the participants were not wearing the third thumb. We do now have an MRI-safe thumb, but that's current research, not this published research. And so they were asked just to move their biological fingers in the scanner. So we looked at the individual fingers within the 2 hand areas of the brain. So how this graph works is that the more similar the representation of the finger in the brain, the closer the dots are to each other in the graph. So the colors are there to indicate the different fingers. So for example, the neighboring fingers on the hand are closer to each other on the graph, so they're more similar to each other in this representational space. So these are the results at baseline. Pre-training, as you can see, both hands are quite similar. So now I'm going to fade out the baseline data and show you results for both hands after 5 days of training with the third thumb. So you can see that slight shift there, hopefully. Yeah. So let's start with the left hand, the non-augmented hand. You can see the representation is quite stable. Nothing too much has changed across the week. But when we look at the right hand, which is the hand we augmented, after a week of training with the third thumb, you can see the subtle shift of representation of the fingers away from their baseline position and actually more towards each other. And this is only 5 days of use. So there's a kind of subtle collapsing in how the right hand, the augmented hand, is represented in the brain. Why? We're still not totally sure, but what's important is that we were able to fundamentally change the way that they were using their bodies by collaborating with this new technology. I should also note that we did do a post-post fMRI a week later with no thumb use, and everything went back to pre-scan positions. So this is ongoing research. We have multiple studies with the third thumb running in Cambridge in the Plasticity Lab, and we're asking really interesting questions about the future body. Professor Tamar Makin and I are really excited to continue this multidisciplinary collaboration. And a couple of future research projects that we're working on is we're interested in understanding how to interface with the neurocognitive resources of various patient groups that could benefit from augmenting the motor abilities of their hand. So we're exploring temporary arm immobilization, so due to a broken arm, providing a third thumb that we currently provide crutches, really kind of based on that, how quickly they can pick it up, what we saw at the Royal Society. Looking at stroke survivors with one paralyzed hand, we're looking to augment the able hand. And also kids born with different hand malformations as well. So instead of starting from scratch with a full prosthetic, instead we could look at collaborating with the third thumb with their existing digits to extend their hand functionality really quickly. So the aim of, and really quickly, but also with limited training. So the aim of this is to develop an augmentation alternative to traditional assistive devices. Thank you for having me. I know that was a lot, but I wanted to give you a little taste of everything. So here's some of my awesome Plasticity Lab members that made the neuroscience research possible. A special thank you to Professor Tamar Makin, the head of the Plasticity Lab at Cambridge University. Yeah, thank you very much.